Mike, I think we're ready to start.
Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of the Belonging Project. Today, we're going to have a fascinating conversation between two gentlemen, a father and a son, one of whom is my partner and the chair of our Hispanic Latinx affinity group, John Islas. John's in LA, and his dad is also in LA, and we are honored to have his father here with us. Former general counsel, extensive experience and contributions towards diversity and inclusion in the profession as well as in their communities. Today's session is really exploring the experiences in the legal profession of a Mexican-American father and son, generations apart, and how those experiences have evolved over the last 50 years. Steve Islas, he's asked me to call him Steve, but it's so uncomfortable because I grew up in a culture where we don't call our parents by their names. Sir, graduated in 1972 from UCLA Law School and had a corporate law career, which culminated with him being general counsel of a Fortune 50 company. John also graduated from UCLA Law School in 1996 and has been a partner in major law firms, including Seyfarth Shaw. Together, they're going to discuss their similar but different experiences as Hispanics, as Mexican Americans, as attorneys in the profession, and the changes that they've seen and what they've seen evolve. So, gentlemen, if it's okay with you, I'd love to give everybody a primer of the Belonging Project. The Belonging Project is a national collaborative initiative which we created out of Seyfarth, but we don't do this alone. We have over 25 national partners. We are partnering with bar associations, with consultants, with legal departments, and with law firms. Our goal is very simple: to provide resources and support for diverse law students and lawyers impacted by the pandemic. This initiative was born out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, as you know, we also are in the middle of a racial pandemic and racial tensions that arose along with awakening this summer. And thankfully, we've had this project going on to continue being a resource to diverse communities. As part of the offerings, we offer webinars twice a week. We also offer a virtual resource hub. If you go to the website, you will find a wealth of information on a variety of topics, from wellness to personal development to professional development. Our webinars cover multiple areas: content for diverse law students, content for diverse lawyers, but also content for leaders. Because we believe until leaders can be inclusive in how they lead and how they work, we will continue to have a gap between our diversity goals and our diversity reality. The third component of this program is a coaching program where we're matching people up with people who have been trained and are certified as coaches for one-on-one coaching for a 3-month period. Finally, we have a mentoring program. So if you're interested in being mentored and you would like to have a mentor, please go to the website and fill out the application. If you go to mentorship, you'll see where you can do that. The bottom line is we know that we can't make a difference in inclusion and diversity in the profession alone. And we made this collaborative, building on the spirit of Ubuntu, which essentially teaches us that I am because we are. We're all in this together. We rise and fall together. So, shall we get started? You ready? Okay. So, Ms. Islas, Steve, where were you born?
I was born in LA in 1947 at a downtown hospital that I still have some contact with because I'm on a foundation that provides support to that hospital.
Cool. And your parents, where were they born?
My dad was born in a place called Yahualica, Jalisco, a small town where as kids we went there, and when I got there, I was expecting like buildings and churches and such like this, and there were 2 streets, a church, and a few stores. Very small place.
You know, we used to tease my dad that there was one road in the town that he was born in, which is a really, really small town, although he claims another village. But how far was your father's village from LA?
Oh gosh, it was about probably 2,000 miles or so.
And what about your mother?
My mother's family was from Chihuahua, Mexico. My mother was born in El Paso. That part of the family were refugees from the Mexican Revolution. That part of the family was on the wrong side of the revolution and was thrown out of the country.
Uh-huh.
And they my mom from there they moved during the Great Depression. They moved to LA.
Okay, very interesting. So were you raised also in LA?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
in the LA area, and for some time lived in a place called Gardena. Next, and then next, we moved in with my grandparents in the area right close to USC, and finally my parents found a way to scrape together the money to buy a house in the suburbs, way in the far, far suburbs.
And then John, where were you born?
Also in Los Angeles, and well, initially grew up in married student housing when my dad and mom were in college, and one of my first memories ever is sitting in a VW van in 1972 and watching my dad walk down the steps of UCLA Law School when I was 3 years old, 3.5 years old. So, and grew up in West Los Angeles, which is kind of, eventually we moved to a place called Cheviot Hills, and that's kind of where I grew up.
Okay. So was the area that you grew up very diverse?
No, not at all. The West Los Angeles is, predominantly white. And the area that I grew up predominantly white, I can't say entirely white, but not diverse at all. And it wasn't really until later that I really started realizing, being Mexican American was somehow different than other kids that I was around. And that, that kind of led to, I would say, like an awakening when I was maybe 10, 11 years old, that there was something a little bit different than most of the people that I grew up around.
So Steve, with you, your parents were both from Mexico and you were born in LA. What kind of neighborhood did you grow up in?
Well, when we lived with my grandparents, it was a pretty diverse neighborhood.
Okay.
And then when we moved to the suburbs, that was not so much the case. It was not homogeneous, but it was not terribly diverse. But high school was interesting. I went to was I'd say at that time maybe 40% Mexican American. Now it's like 70, 80% Mexican American. I went to high school in a place called Santa Fe Springs, and that's an odd feeling to feel like you're part of the majority there.
Yeah, yeah. So did you ever have that feeling of feeling like you were part of the majority?
Well, only because my friends, a good deal of them, were also Mexican American, and it did not seem odd to see so many of us in the same place. And that school had an interesting segregation way about it, because it had A, B, and C tracks. So if there were very few Mexican Americans in the A track, a fair amount in the B track, and most in the C track. And that was an interesting something. It didn't occur to me until maybe I had gone to college and thought, wow, that was kind of an odd thing, that the way that they were separated.
How did they decide who would be in the A track versus B track versus C track?
They had an entrance exam that somehow made the sorting, and then that sorting was kind of stayed that way for your entire 4 years.
Very interesting, because now when we talk about diversity and race in education, there are arguments being made that some of that is still happening in different ways. And that when children are put in certain special groups, they more or less are not allowed to get out of it, and that the ways in which they're sometimes put in these groups are not necessarily equitable. So that's That's interesting.
You know what I found about that, as I reflected on it later, there were different expectations. That was
Yeah.
interesting because the expectations of people in the A track were you were going to go to the UC system or something like this, and in the B track you were going to go to the Cal State system. Nothing wrong with that, of course. Or the C track, you were going to go to junior college. That was kind of the expectations. Now, no one ever articulated it that way, but when I look back at it, that's kind of what happened. And then the guys that went into the C track went to junior college, bought a car, and it was the time to get drafted in those years. That was a first class ticket to being drafted. It seems to me now. That's anecdotal, but it sticks in my head.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. John, it's interesting that you said that at about 10, 11, you began to have this awakening that you were Mexican American, Hispanic, Latin, and there's a lot of research in there that talks about how when people get to the teenage years, that's when they start really questioning or struggling with identity, right? And we know that when it comes to things like race, children at young ages they notice color, but the concept of race is really alien to them. And in fact, they look at skin color the way they look at food and stuff. My kids for the longest time will call their dad Peach, right? And if I said, well, people call me black, they're like, but you're not black, you're brown. And then they would use differentiations for us, who's chocolate, who's caramel, who's this. And so what was it that caused this awareness when you got to around 10, 11 that wasn't there before?
Well, and just to have a very candid discussion about it, sort of a little background. I'm half white and I'm half Mexican American. My mother being German of origin, and then just to put a look, because I think it'll shed a little bit of light on some of my comments. My sister and my brother both have much darker features, look much more like my father, and rounder features, much more like my father. And I would say maybe more identifiable immediately stereotypically. I definitely say stereotypically because there's plenty of Latins that look Latin Americans and Mexican Americans that look just like I do, but stereotypically that are easily to identify as being Mexican American. And I would hear kind of disparaging comments about Mexican Americans or Mexicans. It certainly, first of all, I want to make clear, it wasn't happened every day. And I'm by no means complaining about my life. I think I've had a very charmed life. In some ways, I think I've had enjoyed the greatest privileges. And so, but to be very frank and honest, I would hear disparaging comments like about gardeners and valets and sort of putting down Mexicans or illegal immigration. And it started to cause feelings in me that, well, I am Mexican American, and I would be spoken to in a way that people didn't know who they were talking to, didn't know what my background was. And even the last name Islas, which means islands in Spanish, it's with a Y and not an I, isn't even immediately identifiable to some people as being Hispanic. So that really is the thing that really started to cause me to wonder who I am and think about some of the stories that I'd heard from my grandparents and my great-grandparents and think about what their origins were and how they came to the United States. And it started creating some feelings of maybe anger, as I look back on it later, just hearing comments. And not really, I think probably later, anger at myself for not speaking up about it. There was kind of a quietness that I had to not sort of acknowledging it sometimes at that age. But that's kind of what happened. And, well, this is maybe slightly off topic, but then I also, even though I sort of fit in, I felt like I was trying to fit in. And then it was very interesting. In 6th grade, I got bused it was a year of mandatory busing in Los Angeles, got bused to an inner city school that was about 95% African American. And that was the first time that I also felt truly like a minority, really in a school. And I think that made me think even more about race, and I just vividly recall feeling so welcome and accepted at this new school and how much of a relief that was. And that year really made me think about things more and about acceptance and the kind of feelings that I was going through. So that's really what happened. Hearing a lot of kind of disparaging comments is what started making me kind of trigger in my mind. And then looking around at my brother and his sister and seeing them look a little different than me, and then seeing that my brother, as I was growing up, I had mainly white friends, and my brother had mainly Hispanic and African American friends. Now that's changed later. My friends are quite diverse and probably overwhelmingly Hispanic now. But back then, that really started triggering feelings like wondering why all this was, why he has different friends, and why does my own brother look different than me, and why does, so that's kind of what triggered all those awakening and feelings.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing, as you know now as an adult, that as human beings we have, the need to belong and to connect and to be loved or valued is irreducible. We all have it. We're born with it. We need it. And it's interesting to see how, as we go through our journeys, navigating not just who we are as people, but also this concept of identity, where do I belong? What am I? It's just interesting to hear you talk about how you came through all of that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think really it was, and this is something I think my dad could talk about, is some of the anger I felt too was listening to all my grandfather's stories about fighting in World War II or, and serving this country. I think it created a lot of feelings when I hear kind of disparaging comments. By the way, the first thing I think even as a kid I thought is when people say disparaging things about gardeners or valets, I thought it's an honest living and hardworking people. So I didn't understand that either. But
yeah.
but the things about my grandfather and my grandma, it really triggered strong feelings about their backgrounds.
Did you ever push back on these people who said these things?
Corey, I eventually did as I got older. So I looked to about age 12, I was largely quiet about it. And then from about 12 or 13 or 14 until about 17, as my dad could tell you, those are the kind of lost years where I and got into a little bit of trouble, and we won't get into that, but everything.
I'm going to get the details from your dad after the webinar.
All's well that ends well. It wasn't really until college that I felt I started taking Chicano studies classes. I was at UC Santa Barbara, which was back then predominantly a large majority of white students, and was really drawn to the Chicano Counseling Center and being a Chicano counselor myself at the Chicano Counseling Center and feeling accepted. And I'll be honest with you, I was worried about being accepted myself going there, because I felt like, are they going to think are they going to accept me as, and it was a big relief to feel this. And I think it spawns in there, this sense of relief. And then it's at that point when I started learning about history and so on, and I really started pushing back. And I felt for a while a sense of shame that I didn't speak up when I was younger, that I was able to sort of put my head down and blend in. And it upset me looking back on it. Even every once in a while when I think about it now, I even think about some of the things I thought when I was 11 or 12 years old. And I got to kind of give myself a break and forgive myself for being an 11 or 12-year-old, because it's just easier to kind of blend in than to push back. But starting at 18 or 19, there was definitely a very, very strong pushback, and I would say has been ever since then.
Good for you. So I know that you didn't tell your dad about these comments that were being made. Steve, if he had shared with you what he was going through, let's pretend that he's 12 and you just learned this. How would you have helped him walk through the experience as someone yourself who moved into the suburbs as a kid?
Yeah, well, and you experience these kinds of things. You know, when you're 12 years old, by the way, you can't beat yourself up for these kinds of things because these are hard things to do. It's hard things to take these things on. I would have said, John, first of all, you got to remember the source of these ignorant remarks. Second of all, it's worthwhile to speak up and say, look, I don't know what you're talking about, but that's certainly not my experience and certainly not my family. I've had to do that a lot over the year when people have said big denigrating remarks about immigrants, about Mexican immigrants, about their lack of ambition, a lack of intelligence, criminals, murderers, rapists. My standard response has been, first of all, I don't believe any of that. Second of all, that's certainly not the experience of my family. And I go on to point out the experience of my family is really the American dream. You know, the dream coming to this country and having the next generation do well. That was my dad in particular, coming to this country, and here comes 1939, 1940. He's a Mexican citizen. It has certainly gone back, and he told me he had always intended to go back to school. But he met my mom in LA, loved my mom, and then he said, I love, you know, so I realized that I love this country. So he enlists, and I think John knows the story, and he enlists, and they're getting ready to, after basic training and additional training, they're getting ready to ship him off to New Guinea, to the South Pacific. And they realize he's not an American citizen. And so they tell him, well, you're not an American citizen. And at some point, there was some controversy about non-American citizens who are in the Army being allowed in the combat zone. That's all changed. But that day, they tell him, well, today you're going to be an American citizen. They put him on a bus and send him to Wichita Falls, Texas. They swore him in. They put him then on a train. And about 3 weeks later, he was on a troop ship across the Pacific going to New Guinea. My dad used to get a laugh out of the immigration debates. He says, you know, there's all this controversy about immigration policy. Well, this was the immigration policy that was applicable. I got sworn in and I went to New Guinea.
That's an amazing story. That's an amazing story.
And Dad, tell a little bit about Grandma and then the Zoot Suit riots during the.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I'll see if I can make this a brief description of what happened. So in 1943, there was a time in LA where young Mexican Americans, many, not all, wore these kind of exaggerated clothes, baggy clothes, long coats, fedora hats, chains, and they were called Zoot Suiters. And for some reason, it occurred to some non-Hispanic, non-African American soldiers and sailors that this kind of dress was unpatriotic. And so, in about June of 1943, I'm telling this because there's something that my mom told me. In June of 1943, there was a big uproar among these soldiers and sailors that they were going to take action against these people who dressed in an unpatriotic way. Well, what they did is that one evening, and this went on for a couple of evenings thereafter, they went around downtown LA and began beating these kids up. My mom remembers this because she was in the theater in downtown LA when the soldiers and sailors broke in and started dragging Mexican-American kids out and beating the hell out of them. Now, of course, there was my mom, who had my dad in uniform.
Mike, is Mr. Flash frozen? John, I can see you, so
Yeah, can you?
We're frozen.
Yeah, I think we're okay. Dad, if you can hear me, we can't see your picture or hear you anymore.
off the screen.
Oh, you're back. You're
There,
back.
you're back.
Okay, so that Zoot Suit riot became infamous in Los Angeles.
And Corey, I'll tell you something. Just it was interesting hearing those stories, and then when I got to college, I remember reading about like the Bracetto program during World War II, in which Mexicans were brought in legally to work during World War II in the United States. And then, subsequently, probably about 10 years later, there was a lot of deportations in the 50s. And I think it was all of those stories that I heard, and coupled with the education I was having, that really put an exclamation point, so to speak, on my awareness. That's when it really hit home. Learning about different things historically that happened, and then thinking about some of the things that my dad had been talking about.
John, I didn't ask you this before. Are you the oldest?
So my sister is 11 months older than I am, and then I've got a brother that's 7 years younger than I am. And so my parents were both in college, actually. My dad's actually been confused as my brother before, because he's which I think he likes.
That didn't cost me that much to have that guy fake it and call.
I think he's frozen up again.
He's frozen up again. He'll be back.
Yeah.
Because I want to talk to him about his career journey. But John, before he comes back, what motivated you to go to law school?
Again, this is an exercise in being honest. So I'm going to be quite honest. My dad used to say, "Don't do it."
Really?
But I think he was half kidding. I think he was half kidding. He's a wise man. But to be perfectly frank with you, I mean, I was a psychology major in college, and got accepted in some PhD programs. Just decided I didn't want to do that, and then saw my dad's out there doing law school. I thought it really was no more. I'd been bartending for a year. I took the LSAT on a whim, got into UCLA, and thought I'll try it, and here I am. 25 years later. So, but it was much more interesting and invigorating than I thought it was going to be. And I think probably the reason I chose it is I saw, well, this is something my dad's done that I'm impressed by, and I never thought I'm trying to follow in his footsteps. My dad and I we're different people, and I've never even remotely felt like that. But I thought, well, it's something that that I could share with him, that it would be an interesting experience, and he seemed to have made a good career doing it, and it was probably no more complicated than that,
I always thought that.
Steve, go ahead.
I always thought that John thought, look, Dad seems kind of successful. Gosh, if he can do it, I can certainly do it.
What led you to going to law school? Why did you choose to be a lawyer?
Well, I hate to admit this happenstance also, because what happened was I'm in my senior year at UCLA undergrad, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And in the UCLA student newspaper, the Daily Bruin, there was an ad in the sports section, which is the only section at that point I was reading, and it said, minority students can take the LSAT test on Saturday for free. I said, well, what the heck? I'm not doing anything on Saturday. So my total preparation for the LSAT was to sharpen 2 number 2 pencils. And of course, then all good things happened after that, because I have liked the profession. And I made a joke with John and his sister also, Susan and Justin, and his other sister, Emily, all of whom have gone to law school.
The whole family?
The whole family. Everyone's gone to law school. Correct.
That, sir, is a legacy. No, seriously, that's a legacy.
That's right. I guess that's right. But what So happenstance led me to law school, and then the profession. I have to tell you this: I didn't even know a lawyer. I did not know a lawyer until the first day of law school. I'd never met one, and so I wasn't really sure what people did. And that in and of itself was one of those experiences that I think is generational. We're talking about generational change. That was a generational change because I had no idea what they did, who they were. My thought was when I started law school was, well, are there government agencies that employ lawyers? I had no idea. And ultimately, I found my way into one government agency right after law school.
So what was your first job after law school?
My first job was with the National Labor Relations Board.
Okay, and what did you do with them?
I was a field attorney, and so mostly it was investigating and holding hearings. And I liked it. It was interesting. But at the same time, I could see, well, this probably is not something that I want to do for a career. So I thought, well, maybe there were lawyer jobs in corporations. And from there, I went to ARCO, a big oil company, and did labor law for them. Before that, I clerked between my second and third year for a small Beverly Hills tax firm. And there's one thing I learned. Well, I learned two important things. One, I really learned what high quality legal research looked like and how demanding it could be. And the second thing I learned is I didn't like tax law. So those were two good lessons.
Very good lessons. Right. Then what did you do after that?
After that, I went to Northrop. And the reason I went to Northrop is that at ARCO, I could see that the big interesting jobs were not just in labor law, but were in the business law side of the house. And I went to the 53rd floor of the ARCO Tower and saw where the general counsel's office was. And it looked about 3 times the size of my house. And I thought, wow, whatever this guy does, I think I'd like to figure out what he does. This looks like a good job. And he was a very affable guy, a good guy. And actually, we talked a few minutes about what this really big job looked like. I went to Northrop because Northrop said I could do different things. I could do labor law and I could do some other things. I stayed at Northrop, I hate to admit this, for 36 years. But over those 36 years, I had 10 different jobs. So really, about every 3.5 years, I was changing jobs. Every time I thought about leaving Northrop, and I had a number of occasions where I offered jobs outside of Northrop. Every time I thought about that, they seemed to make it more attractive for me to stay. And then ultimately, of course, I was in the county.
So it sounds to me like the ability to do different things and to constantly be learning was important to you.
Very, and I think absolutely critical in the corporate law area, especially. I think in the legal profession where you are in a law firm, I think having a super specialty is very, very important. And from the general counsel point of view, and of course, I was deputy before that, and I was a corporate secretary, and I was chief counsel for the largest part of Northrop's business for some time. Looking to a law firm that has real specialists, really good in one area, very important. Inside lawyers, you've got to be prepared. I think if you're going to move to the general business attorney level, you have to be ready to take on things that are out of your comfort zone. New areas of law you have to learn. Now you don't have to be as good as a specialist. Obviously, almost certainly you cannot be. You've got to be good enough to understand what the problems are and good enough to know what you don't know. And I was pretty good at that.
Now, when you think about people who inspired you, or even, let's not talk about people who inspired you yet. We can come back to that. One of the things we talk about in the legal profession is how women and minorities tend to be over-mentored but under-sponsored, and that sponsorship is a key part of success. Sponsorship being someone who has political power, political capital, social capital, and is willing to use it on your behalf. People who can be in the high places and advocate for you to get opportunities. In your situation, as a Hispanic American, Mexican American, at various stages of your education, you weren't surrounded by people like you. And in the profession, the same. Tell us about some of the people who were instrumental in your journey and how that came to be.
Well, I think in particular, I think later in my career with North in particular, now that I think about it, there were a couple of business clients, inside business Norfolk clients, who for some reason I got along with well, and they trusted me, and they trusted my legal advice. And because they trusted my legal advice, they were prepared to help me, like you do inside the corporation. Joe Gallagher, he was the head of Norfolk Aircraft Division. The Norfolk Aircraft Division probably accounted for 80% of the then Norfolk business. He was willing to stick his neck out and say, well, we got to consider Steve for other things. There are need for advancement. Jim Roach, a fellow who was still my good friend, who became Air Force Secretary. Jim Roach went out of his way to make sure that people knew that he valued my opinion and that I was capable of doing other things. Jim Roach actually recruited me to interview to be general counsel of the Department of Defense, which I did, and did not get that job. I won't go into all the reasons for it. Among those reasons, though, it was kind of funny because I think I was on my way to be general counsel of the DoD until they realized that I was a Democrat. and then Jim Roach helped me along the way very, very much. The then general counsel, a fellow named Dick Moore, helped promote me. His predecessor, Bill Elliott, also general counsel. Bill pressed for me to be a vice president. Dick Moore helped me along the way after that. And then Northrup's two CEOs, Diana Hamilton, Ron Schindler, sponsored me in front of the board of directors to be corporate secretary and then later to be general counsel. And Ron's successor, Wes Bush, kept me on as a general counsel, and Ron decided to depart. So I had help along the way. Notice there were no Hispanics in that, because there was no Hispanics at that level in corporations as things were going along. But those kind of relationships, I think, were built on a mutual trust, and because they saw that I had some value to the company and some value to them personally, because I helped promote the business history of the company and help them be successful as well.
That's so powerful, being able to build trust and also to have respect, right? If someone's going to use their capital on you, they want to know that there's some security in that bet that they're taking. Yes. Now, you did end up being general counsel.
Yes.
Well, I was going to, okay, before I ask you about being general counsel, do you ever regret that DoD opportunity going by?
No, I don't, and I'll tell you why. What happened is actually I could have had another job in that administration if I wanted to. It was at a time when, and this is a story that relates to people who don't have family money and have lots of other responsibilities. I was just getting into a high earning time. And there was a hard trade-off to be made between actually taking that job, which I'm pretty sure I would have taken the DoD job, and trading it off for the financial security that I could see was on its way. So, yeah, but no, I don't regret it. The fellow who got that job was a real good guy, and he and I got along famously. And it turned out that I had a lot of business in front of the DoD in subsequent times, and felt like he treated me fairly.
That's awesome. Okay, as GC, your 3 top lessons that you've learned in your 50 years of your career in being GC. 3 top lessons that us young ones should take and use and apply. Well,
I think for me, so as general counsel, so personal development way advice, and that is, first, don't be afraid to take things out of your comfort zone. If you're in the corporation and you want to advance, don't shy away from those kinds of things. Second, if you're going to do that, or coincidental with this first point, if you're going to do that, prepare. When I was going to be corporate secretary, I knew something about securities and exchange law, and I knew something about governance, but I didn't know a lot to be corporate secretary. So for about a month in advance of I took that job, I studied. I every night I studied. And I also then recruited a law firm partner to be my personal tutor to make sure that I really understood these things. And I told him, I said, I hope you're not going to be embarrassed, and because I'm not going to be embarrassed, to ask you all the dumb questions possible, because I have to really understand this, and I can't pretend to know stuff I don't know. And so one big lesson, advancing in a corporation, take stuff out of your comfort zone and get ready and prepare for it. Well, as a general counsel, advice to the outside lawyers, and then there's nothing so important as to be responsive. So Friday afternoon, 5:30, a busy Friday afternoon in the summertime in LA, I can think of a situation where we had a real problem on our hands at one of our operations. And it was me, I called one outside counsel whose phone just rang, called another one, called the third one. He said, Steve, I'll be there in half an hour. Traffic notwithstanding. We worked all that weekend, came to a good solution on Monday morning, and after that, that guy was cool for us. But for outside counsel being responsive like that, there's absolutely no substitute for it. Now, he was really good and really competent at the job, but he never got to foot in the door and he did not answer that Friday afternoon call.
Thank you so much. Those are timeless, classic lessons applicable across the board. I'm going to switch gears. So I'm Black, born in Canada, from Sierra Leone, raised in Nigeria, but Black. And in the Black world, we talk about colorism, sort of as a consequence of racism, but there is this thing where, Black people come in all shades, and there are implications not just within how we interact with each other based on color, but how the world interacts with us. Studies indicate a lot about how people who are lighter skinned are treated and accepted, and there's this whole discussion. But apparently, we're not the only ones who have that conversation. And I know this is true, even in some other countries abroad, like in India, there are conversations around skin tone. So both of you have different colors. How has colorism shown up in your experiences, and how have you navigated it? John, I'm going to give you the opportunity to go first.
Well, as I said, I grew up, and really even to this day, where people don't know who they're talking to, and I have the benefit of that, if I want it, and as a kid, like I said, I sort of just stayed quiet, and I have the benefit of being able to sort of fit in easier if I remain quiet, because of my lighter skin. For me, I think I don't want to be treated that way. So it's, like I said, I'm not complaining. I've had a very charmed life, but I've gone out of my way for people to know who I am, because I don't want to be treated that way. I want them to know who I am. And, sometimes I've even felt a little bit of recoil from that, because then once I announce who I am, then I start feeling like I've brought stereotypes, or this guy's a product of affirmative action or something like that upon myself. And every once in a while, I felt like I've been spoken to in a way that somebody feels like I'm exploiting a situation or something, or taking advantage of something. And so I guess to sum up, my experience is that I've had the benefit, if I wanted it, to be treated favorably. I'm just being direct and honest about it. And it's something that I think that I'm repudiated, in the sense that, of any shame of being half white or anything like that. It's just, I just want people to know who I am. and I want them to treat me as for who I am. And I'm just sort of deeply proud of my Hispanic heritage and my father and my grandparents. And it's something that I want people to know about right away. So I guess that's been my experience, which I think has been a different one than my father.
So have you, because I'll tell you, my children are biracial. And with my oldest daughter, when she was a baby, people thought she was Guatemalan, Indian, Filipino, everything you can think of but black and white. And at times when we were together as a family, people didn't question that her dad was her dad, but they would sometimes question that I was her mom. Like I didn't belong with her. And of course, it's ironic because she looks so much like me that at some point that became apparent. And people were just like, oh yeah, those two go together. But I would sometimes get questions and sometimes get comments. And from talking to you, I know that the complexions in your family vary. The complexions in my family vary. In fact, when I was younger, my dad is very dark-skinned. And when I was younger, I was lighter than this, kind of orangey. And somebody made a comment about my mom, because my mom is light-skinned by our standards. And someone made a comment about it. And so I perceived that as a bad thing, and I went home and I asked my mom why she was so yellow, which of course led to questions of where did that come from, because I never cared before. But I had heard people talking about light-skinned people and speculating that they bleach. All this to say that were there times when you were together as a family that you noticed or observed people interact, the world interact with you or your dad or your siblings differently because of your complexion? And I'd like to hear your position too, Dad, after John's done.
I would say the answer overall that is yes. I can't say I can remember a vivid moment where we're all together where I can cite you an episode, although there is one thing I'm thinking about. But I can most definitely say that that I noticed people treat my brother, who's dark skin, round features, just differently than they would treat me, and more. They give me the benefit of the doubt as to my IQ, really, almost, more than they would for Justin, and also that when I would say I'm Mexican American, they go, "Oh, you mean Spanish?" So, I mean, no, I mean Mexican. I mean, it's a long history, obviously, Spain and coming to Mexico and all that. But no, I mean I'm Mexican American. Oh, you mean Spanish? And then a lot of comments like, "Well, you're not really like them, though." It's a very
I detest those comments.
You're
not like the rest comments.
Yeah.
I hate them.
And then. Again, this has not been repeated every day of my life, but some very, very deeply offensive jokes, even in the workplace, not at Cyforth, not even close. This is a wonderful place, but I've had some really, really deeply offensive jokes made to me, and including in writing to me. Where it's mind-blowing and shocking that somebody would do that and say those things. I mean, I think there's been a liberty that I think sometimes people feel very, very, not often, but enough to be memorable, that my brother Justin, I just don't think anyone would ever dream of making that kind of specific joke to him. Although I know my dad's had some to him too, but that's been my experience, which I think is a bit different than my father's.
So very quickly, do you think that you being light-skinned impacted you questioning whether you'd be accepted when you went to college and wanted to join the Chicano Students Council? Did you think that was going to be a factor?
I really, now I'm almost ashamed of this too, because just being a little too hard on myself. But I remember being afraid to go down there and wanting so deeply for these Latino, Hispanic people to accept me and wondering if they would, and kind of holding my breath, wondering, are they going to really, and it wasn't even close how much I was accepted. And it was such a wonderful feeling to feel like I could be around people that were similar to me and had the same kinds of values or interests in history or whatever it was, and but yeah, I was afraid to be accepted, which was just an odd feeling. I'm trying to find I was thinking about the name of this project, the Belonging Project. That really, the name rings true with me because I was looking. I wanted to belong.
Yeah. So we've got 7 minutes. So, and John, I want you to end with some music because part of what people don't know about you, in addition to being a lawyer, you're a musician, and I've heard some of your music, and it's amazing. And I know there's a tie to your culture with flamenco music and all of that. So if you are listening and you have some questions or you want something for either of these gentlemen to answer, please put that in the chat. And John, if you can sort of start getting ready, I'm going to talk to your dad. And I hate to say this, by the time this webinar is over, I may have to borrow your dad for mine because I've fallen in love with the guy. He's so awesome.
Sure, please do. And what I'm going to play, I would call, I have some flamenco music that I could play today. I'm going to play a little bit what I call flamenco inspired. It's a little medley of some of my original stuff. But and whenever you're ready, let me know. I'll just kind of get ready. Please proceed with your conversation.
All right.
In celebration of Hispanic Heritage.
Dad, Ms. Isla, sir.
Yes.
From your perspective, how did you see the colorism playing out as you were raising your kids? And I'm thinking of this from a parent's perspective. How did that impact you as a parent, watching the world interact with them differently?
Well, I have to say, John hit the nail on the head about those three presumptions, I think, that went with my brown skin and with Justin's brown skin. And I'll give you two instances. Because Justin and I look a lot alike. And I'll give you one example of where I saw Justin receive the kind of unusual disparate treatment that is troubling. I was on the police commission at the time, and I also had a Northrop company car. I would occasionally let Justin use the company car, all permissible by the company, all that sort of stuff. But I would tell him, Justin, you are not going to live right in this car. I'm telling you, first of all. And you know what I think about cops here, Justin, which is, I'm on the police commission, but there's no purpose, there's no good to be had by being a wise guy to cops when they get stopped. He got stopped, I think, at least 3 times because he looked wrong. Brown-skinned young man in a Crown Victoria car. And there's no doubt in my mind what that was all about. Yeah. Absolutely no doubt in my mind what that was about. You look wrong for this car. So that was one example. The other example, I make a joke about this. To me, it was funny at the time. We were moving houses, and so we're moving furniture from one house to another. We're moving from one West LA house to Pacific Palisades house. Now, Pacific Palisades is a very upscale, very, very white area.
Okay.
And so we had this rented truck, and Justin and I were taking furniture off. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And I said, Justin, when the Bel Air Patrol comes around here, which is the local private police area, and they look at us, they're not going to think we're taking that furniture in the house. You realize that, don't you? So we were cautious after that. We were very cautious after that. And why? Because I know that his color skin and my color skin, we looked out of place there. And it's a sad story to hear, but I think you have to be prepared for it. And I tried to prepare Justin for that.
So what did you teach your kids about navigating the world like that? Because as a parent, it's so hard to want to teach them to be inclusive and to believe the best, while at the same time being honest with them about the reality.
Yes. I had to be honest with Justin, especially about that car business, because there's too much danger for him to do anything but be straightforward about this. And these things are going to happen. They're not right, but there's no good that is going to come out of this by you complaining about it to the cops on the street. It happened. He handled it well, and so that was lesson number one. And I guess the other lesson that I tried to impart to these guys was, when it comes right down to it, this color of our skin stuff doesn't make a damn bit of difference to anybody except people who have that stuck in their head. That has nothing to do with us. It has to do with them.
It has to do with them.
Yeah.
Excellent. Did you treat your daughters differently than you treated your sons?
I try to be straight with them about these things. I try to be very upfront with them about these things, about what to expect.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I need more of this. I need more of this in my life, more of this positivity. So honored to have had this time to talk about your journey. And John, you are so blessed to have grown up in a home with all this inspiration, and your grandparents on all sides just sound phenomenal. So I'm going to let you close us if nobody has any questions. Well, actually, before you play, John, do you have any parting thoughts that you would like to share?
Oh, I mean, my parting thought would be get involved, get connected. I'm personally just got elected regional president for Southern California for the Hispanic National Bar Association, and I'm also the chair of the communications committee. So getting involved in organizations like that and connecting, even if anyone's on the call and wants to email me, I think is
perfect.
The benefit of something I've seen evolve that, for example, I don't think my dad had the benefit of as much when he was younger. It's really been meaningful to connect.
Sure.
Parting thoughts, sir?
No, I thank you for allowing me to participate in this. I think this is a really good thing that people is sponsoring.
Thank you. John, take us away.
All right.
John, where can everybody find your music?
I've got some of it on iTunes,
Okay.
and some of it's on YouTube, but there's some original music on iTunes. Just run my name through it, you should be able to find it.
All right. I've heard the music on iTunes. It's fabulous. So check it out. Next Friday, we have another webinar. It's going to be on how to go from being a law student to being general counsel. It is Hispanic Heritage Month. Check out what's going on in your communities. Participate. Father and son, thank you so much for honoring us with your time. We appreciate you. Happy Friday.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.